The invitation was printed on cream cardstock, 110 pounds weight, with our names embossed in navy blue. I remember the exact weight of it in my hand, the way it sat heavier than paper should. We had ordered 147 of them. My parents received number 1. They RSVP'd no by text message. Not a call. A text. 6 words. Sorry honey, Karen needs us that weekend. Karen is my sister. Karen's daughter was having a birthday party for her son, my parents' great-grandchild, and that party was being held on the same Saturday as my wedding. Not the rehearsal dinner. Not the bridal shower. The wedding itself. The actual legal ceremony where I would stand in front of the people I love and marry the man I had spent 11 years building a life with. My name is Claire Ashworth. I am a 41-year-old estate planning attorney. I have spent the last 16 years helping families sort out what their parents really meant. Not what they said, not what they assumed, but what they actually put in writing. I have seen the inside of 100 family implosions. I recognize the architecture. I recognized it the moment that text came in. This is not a story about a wedding. This is a story about a document my father signed 33 years ago. A promissory note my mother co-signed and then forgot she'd ever touched. And what happened when I stopped pretending the balance was zero. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New. The channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that the fine print exists whether you read it or not. If you've ever watched someone claim they love you while simultaneously treating your biggest day like a scheduling inconvenience, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay close. This one's going to require your full attention. I should tell you something about the way estate planning attorneys think. We are trained from the very first year of practice to look at relationships the way other people look at contracts. Who gave what? Who received what? What was promised? What was documented? What was assumed and therefore unenforceable? Most people walk through their families the way they walk through a house they grew up in. They stop seeing the cracks in the walls because the cracks have always been there. I stopped being able to do that somewhere around my 3rd year of practice, when I sat across from a 68-year-old man who could not understand why his daughter hadn't spoken to him in 11 years. He kept saying, but I never did anything wrong. And I kept looking at the document in front of me, a trust amendment signed the week after her college graduation, and thinking, you did everything wrong. You just did it in writing, which is somehow worse. That man was not my father. But I thought about him often in the weeks after that text message arrived. My father's name is Gerald Ashworth. He worked in commercial insurance for 31 years, retired at 63, and has spent the last 8 years doing exactly what my mother tells him to do. My mother, Diane, is the kind of woman who calls herself the family's backbone and means it as a compliment. She is organized, relentlessly optimistic about other people's problems, and completely incapable of admitting she has favorites. She has favorites. Karen is 44. She married at 22, had 2 daughters, those daughters each had children, and my mother reorganized her entire identity around the word grandma the moment the first one arrived. I am not exaggerating. She stopped being Diane. She became Grandma D. She had it put on an apron. I was the other one. The one who left for law school and came back with a briefcase instead of a baby. I was the one who flew home for every holiday, sent the birthday cards on time, drove my father to his cardiologist appointments when my mother's sciatica was acting up, paid for the new roof on their house in 2019 because the insurance claim fell short, and they couldn't cover the gap. $4,200. I have the canceled check. I have all the canceled checks. My fiancé David knew my family. He had known them for 11 years. He had sat at their table, fixed their garage door, attended Karen's daughter's quinceañera, and twice helped my father move furniture because Karen's husband had a bad back. David is the kind of man who never once asked me why I kept trying. He simply handed me the tools and stood beside me while I tried. We got engaged in March. We set the date for the following October, a full 19 months out. We mailed the save the dates in June. My parents called to say they received it. They said they were excited. My mother cried. My father said we wouldn't miss it for the world. I wrote that down. Not because I expected to need it, It's just what I do. The text arrived on a Tuesday in August, 14 months after the save the dates. 7 weeks before the wedding. I read it twice and then set my phone face down on my desk. I had a client coming in at 2 o'clock and I needed my hands to be still before they arrived. My paralegal knocked at 2:15. I had not moved the phone. Sorry honey, Karen needs us that weekend. That was the entire message. No explanation of why Karen needed them. No acknowledgement that this was my wedding. No we're so sorry or we feel terrible or can we call and explain. Just the flat statement of a decision already made, delivered as if they were canceling a dentist appointment. I picked up my phone and screenshotted the text. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it October. I drove home at 7. David was making dinner. I sat down at the kitchen table and told him. He turned off the burner. He sat down across from me. He did not say anything for a long moment, and then he said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need to think." What I was actually doing, what I could not yet say out loud, was beginning to calculate. Because here is what most people don't understand about estate planning attorneys. We are not just document processors. We are the people families call when someone dies and the survivors discover that everything they assumed, everything they were certain about, was not written down. We spend our professional lives in the space between what people believed and what was actually true. And I knew something the rest of my family had long since stopped thinking about. I knew what my father had signed. I should back up. In 1991, my parents bought their house. It was a 3-bedroom colonial in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. They paid $187,000 for it. They put down $30,000, money that came in part from my maternal grandmother, Eleanor, who died the year before and left her estate split equally between my mother and my uncle. My grandmother, Eleanor, was not a warm woman. She was, however, meticulous. She kept records the way some people keep secrets, carefully, completely, and without sentimentality. When she died, she left 2 things of significance. Her house, which was sold and split, and a leather ledger in which she had documented every financial transaction she had ever made with or for her children. When my mother inherited her share, my grandmother's attorney, a man named Howard Stills, who had been practicing in Columbus since 1963, called my mother in to review the ledger. My mother signed an acknowledgement that she had received and reviewed it. In that ledger were 3 notations beside my mother's name. Gifts. Loans. 1 of each category. There was also a promissory note. I found out about the promissory note by accident in 2018, when I was helping my parents update their own estate documents. My father mentioned it in passing, offhandedly, the way you mention a bill you've already paid. He said, "Oh, and there was that note from Eleanor, but that was settled ages ago." I asked to see the settlement documentation. He looked at me the way people look at estate planning attorneys when they realize we are not just their daughter, we are also their attorney. Then he said he'd have to find it. He never found it. Because it didn't exist. What did exist, what I located 3 weeks after the text message arrived, through a records request to the probate court of Franklin County, Ohio, was the original promissory note, filed as part of my grandmother's estate, in the amount of $14,000, signed by my father, dated March of 1991, with a repayment schedule attached. The note had never been marked satisfied. It had never been discharged in the estate proceedings. It had simply been overlooked, or more precisely, it had been quietly set aside by a family that assumed my grandmother's death had functioned as a kind of forgiveness. It had not. I sat in my office at 10:30 on a Thursday night in September, 6 weeks before my wedding, and I read that document 4 times. Then I called the probate court to confirm what I was looking at. Then I pulled up the Ohio statute on promissory notes and the applicable limitations periods. Then I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. With interest, simple interest at the rate specified in the note, the outstanding balance was $31,847. I did not call my parents that night. I put the document back in the folder named October, and went home and told David I'd had a productive evening. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I poured a glass of water and drank it standing at the kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard, which was still dark and perfectly quiet. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life. 3 weeks before the wedding, Karen called me. This was unexpected. Karen and I did not talk often. Our relationship existed in the shared space of family events and obligatory texts. She called on a Sunday afternoon, and her voice had the particular energy of someone who has been asked to make a call she does not entirely want to make. She said my parents felt terrible. She said they were torn. She said, and here she made a noise that might have been a laugh, that Grandma Dee was just so important to the kids, and Mason's birthday was only going to happen once, and surely I understood. I said, "How old is Mason turning?" She paused. 4. I wrote that down. Mason's 4th birthday. Call from Karen. Sunday, September 14th, 3:22 p.m. I said, "Karen, did Mom and Dad come to your wedding?" She said, "That's different." I said, "How?" She did not have an answer for that. The silence went on long enough that I could hear a child in the background, running and laughing, completely unaware of the phone call happening on his behalf. I said, "I hope you all have a wonderful time." I hung up. Then I called my attorney, not as a daughter but as a colleague, and I said, "I need you to draft a demand letter. Here is the documentation." If you have ever watched people who couldn't find a single free Saturday in 19 months suddenly discover that some weekends matter more than others, you already know where this goes. Stay with me. The folder is about to come out. The letter arrived at my parents' house on a Thursday, sent certified mail, return receipt requested. It was a demand for repayment of an outstanding promissory note dated March 4, 1991, signed by Gerald Ashworth, in favor of the estate of Eleanor Margaret Holt, now rightfully assigned to Eleanor's surviving heir, my mother, and through her estate plan to me as the designated beneficiary of that specific asset, a designation my mother had made in 2016 and apparently forgotten, in a document she had signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. My mother had given me the note. Legally, properly, documentably. She had done it while updating her own estate plan, for years before any of this happened, in a meeting I had facilitated and she had initialed on every page. I know because I have my copy. My father called me at 7:48 on Friday morning. I let it go to voicemail. Then I sat at my desk and listened to the message, his voice moving from confused to frightened to something that sounded, for just a moment, like the beginning of anger. I called him back at 9. Business hours. He said, "Claire, what is this?" I said, "It's a demand letter, Dad. It's what it says it is." He said, "This is family money. Your grandmother would have wanted." I said, "Grandmother Eleanor kept a ledger, Dad. She documented every transaction she ever made. She did not cancel this note. She didn't leave a letter saying to forgive it. She left the note, filed with the probate court, with the repayment schedule attached." He was quiet. I said, "I have the original filing documents. I have Mom's assignment. I have the interest calculations at the statutory rate." He said, "Claire, your sister's grandchildren." I said, "I know, Dad." I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. I said, "I'll be at the house Sunday afternoon. We can talk about it then." The house smelled the way it always smelled. Coffee and the lavender candles my mother bought in bulk from a wholesale club. Karen was there. Her husband, Tom, was there. My mother was at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug, and my father was standing at the counter, and the energy in that room was the energy of people who had spent several days constructing an argument. Karen had brought a folder of her own. I noticed that immediately. A manila folder, the commercial kind with nothing written on the tab. She set it on the table and left her hand on top of it, as if it might escape. My mother began. She said they had done so much for me over the years. She said they had always supported me. She said this was not who we were as a family. She said Grandmother Eleanor, and here her voice went thin and careful, would have wanted the family to be together. She said the note was an old thing, a forgotten thing, and dragging it out now at this time right before my wedding. She stopped. She looked at me and said, "This is about the wedding." I said, "Is it?" Karen said, You're punishing us. I opened my folder. It was a dark blue expanding file, the kind I use for estate documents. I set it on the table. I said, I want to show you a few things. I took out the first document, the original promissory note, the copy I had obtained from the probate court, showing the court stamp, the filing date, my father's signature in blue ink. I placed it in the center of the table and named it aloud. Promissory note. March 4, 1991. Signed by Gerald Ashworth. Face value $14,000. Filed with the Franklin County Probate Court as part of Eleanor Holt's estate. I took out the second document. Assignment. Signed by Diane Ashworth. July 14, 2016. Transferring her interest in this note to me as a designated asset in her estate plan. Notarized. 2 witnesses. My mother's face changed. Karen said. She didn't know what she was signing. I said. She signed it in the presence of a notary, Karen. She initialed every page. I looked at my mother. You knew exactly what you were signing. I walked you through every item in that meeting. That's my job. Tom said, this is ridiculous. You can't sue your own parents. I said, I'm not suing anyone. I sent a demand letter. That's different. Karen's folder was still on the table. She hadn't opened it. I looked at it and then looked at her. She said, we have documentation too. Things you promised. She opened the folder. Inside were printed email chains, 3 of them going back to 2017. She slid them toward me. Picked them up. I read them. They were emails in which I had, at various points, written things like I'll take care of it and don't worry about the money and I've got it covered. I set them down. I said, Karen, those emails are about the roof. The 2019 roof. I did take care of it. I paid $4,200 toward the gap on an insurance claim. That's not a promise to forgive a 31-year-old promissory note. Those are 2 entirely different instruments. Karen stared at me. I said, an attorney would tell you that those emails don't constitute an enforceable waiver. They aren't specific enough, they don't reference this note, and they postdate the assignment by 3 years. I paused. You know, if you'd like a second opinion, I am happy to wait while you call someone. Nobody moved. My mother said very quietly, Claire, we're your parents. I reached back into the folder. I took out the last item. It was not a document. It was a photograph, printed on standard paper, taken from my phone, dated by the metadata I had transcribed along the bottom. It was a screenshot of the family group text. October 7th of the previous year, 2:34 p.m. The message was from my mother. It was a photograph of Mason at his 3rd birthday party, holding a cake, and the caption read, Our whole world right here. Can't believe how fast they grow. It was sent 4 hours after David and I had mailed our wedding invitations. I put the photograph in the center of the table and did not say anything. My mother looked at it. My father looked away. Karen's husband made a sound in his throat that was not quite a word. Karen said, That's not fair. I said, I know. I started putting the documents back in my folder, one at a time, in the order I had removed them. My father said, Claire, what do you want? I looked at him. He looked older than he had at Christmas. He had the look of a man who has suddenly understood that a door he thought was open has been closed for quite some time, and he simply hadn't noticed because no one had changed the handle. I said, I want what I've always wanted, Dad. I zipped the folder shut. I want to have been worth showing up for. I stood up. I put the folder under my arm. My father's eyes went to the folder, and I watched something move across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the proximity of it, the uncomfortable neighborhood of it. I said, the demand letter has a response deadline. My attorney has all the documentation. Whatever you decide, that's between you and her. I left. I drove home in 17 minutes. David was on the couch reading. I sat down next to him, put my feet up on the coffee table, and stared at the ceiling. He said, How did it go? I said, They looked at the photograph. He reached over and took my hand. We got married on the 14th of October on a Saturday afternoon, In a small venue with exposed brick walls and ivy that had been trained over the windows for the better part of a decade. 112 people attended. My parents were not among them. Karen sent flowers the following Monday. No card. 12 days after the wedding, my father's attorney contacted mine with the proposed settlement. They offered $18,000. My attorney countered at the full $31,847. After 2 weeks of correspondence, they settled at $27,500, paid via certified funds within 30 days. My father sold the small boat he had kept in the garage for 8 years and never used. My mother did not call me directly for 3 months. When she finally did, in January, she said she missed me. I said I missed her too. Neither of us said anything about the money. We talked for 22 minutes. I wrote that down too, not the amount of time but the fact that she called. Karen and I have not spoken since the Sunday in September. Tom, Karen's husband, sent me an email in November. A short one. He said he knew it wasn't his place and he was sorry. He said he had tried to tell Karen that missing the wedding was a mistake, and no one had listened to him. He said congratulations to David and me. I read that email 4 times. I did not respond, but I did not delete it either. It lives in a folder I haven't named yet. The $27,500 did not go into a savings account or toward a vacation, or toward any of the things a reasonable person might spend a legal settlement on. I used it to fully fund a $529 college savings account. The beneficiary is my niece Alyssa, Karen's younger daughter, who is 8 years old and who did not choose any of this and who has, on the 3 occasions I have seen her at family events since then, hugged me with the uncomplicated warmth of a child who simply knows she is loved. I do not tell anyone that I did this. Alyssa's mother doesn't know yet. She will, when the time comes, and the money will be there regardless of whether the knowledge lands well. My grandmother Eleanor would have approved of that, I think. She was not a warm woman, but she was a precise one. She understood that love without documentation is just a feeling, and feelings change with the weather. The original promissory note, the one filed with the Franklin County Probate Court in 1991, the one I retrieved and placed in the center of my parents' kitchen table, lives in my filing cabinet at home. Second drawer. Hanging file labeled Eleanor. I look at it sometimes. Not often. It is a single page typed on a machine that slightly skewed the margins, with my father's signature at the bottom in the handwriting of a younger man who believed he had all the time in the world to settle his debts. He had the time. He simply chose for 33 years not to use it. Some people think that boundaries are something you build when you're angry. I used to think that too. Now I understand that a boundary is just an acknowledgement of what was always true, that there are limits to what you absorb, and that those limits do not become cruel simply because someone else forgot to read the paperwork. My parents didn't miss my wedding because they didn't love me. I believe they love me in the way they know how to love, which is the same way most families love. Unevenly, with favorites they won't name and sacrifices they don't count, and a belief, deep and mostly unexamined, that the one who shows up the most will always show up again. I showed up again. I'm still showing up. I simply stopped pretending the ledger balanced. If this story reminded you that love is not the same as being taken for granted, and that quietly, precisely, in the language of documents and receipts and things put in writing, you are allowed to stop absorbing what you never agreed to carry, then take that as your sign today. Tell someone in your life what you're actually worth. Update what needs updating. And if you know someone who needs to hear that calm is not the same as weak, send them here. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.